A huge crowd outside the Vatican mission in Panama demanding Noriega. In Nicaragua, who killed 2 nuns, 1 an American? The Contras deny responsibility. And in this country, the suburbanites who come to the city shopping for drugs.
NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. In this country and in Panama tonight, speculation is building that the standoff over Manuel Noriega is about to be resolved. NBC's Brian Ross reports from Homestead Air Force Base in South Florida. There is a heavy buildup of federal marshals at that facility, but nothing concrete on their assignment. However, a Noriega pilot, said to be a key suspect in the drug deals, has been arrested, and he is expected to be flown to Homestead tonight. At the Papal Nuncio in Panama City, meanwhile, there are reports that Noriega is tired and depressed in his isolation, but no sympathy for him in the noisy crowd that assembled outside the Vatican mission today. NBC's Dan Molina is in Panama tonight.
Panamanians who risked their lives by holding anti-Noriega demonstrations over the last 2 years are getting impatient. They want him out of the Vatican embassy. They don't seem to care whether it's the United States or Panama that takes him into custody. Through the afternoon, the size of this crowd grew dramatically, with U.S. troops making it clear that they intended to keep the crowd from getting any closer to Noriega. Among those peering into the embassy grounds earlier today were U.S. Senators Sam Nunn, John Warner, and Charles Robb. At one point when the senators were not there, some people who were not identifiable could be seen departing the embassy.
75mm recoilless rifle.
Nunn, Warner, and Robb were shown thousands of weapons confiscated from all around Panama.
What surprised us? What was here that we really didn't envision?
Well, sir, what surprises us is just the enormity of it all. There's only 5,000 combat troops here. We found 75,000 weapons.
Looks like.
They also got a tour of some of the items confiscated from Noriega's various homes. Afterwards, Nunn said he wanted to see a quick but orderly scale down in U.S. troop strength here. He also had some mild criticism of U.S. intelligence capabilities.
We found that in other actions. We keep thinking we emphasized it more, but apparently we still are deficient in that respect.
Deputy Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger looked into possibilities for renewed economic development, but after a visit to the Panama Canal, his thoughts seemed to be on Noriega.
The U.S. policy remains as earlier stated. We would like Mr. Noriega in the United States, period.
Late this afternoon, bursts of violence erupted in the crowd outside the Vatican embassy. They broke through a small outer barrier, but remained well away from the muzzles of U.S. guns and about 300 yards from the embassy compound. Dan Molina, NBC News, Panama City.
And when it comes to Noriega, all roads eventually lead to the White House, where the question is, what's acceptable to President Bush? NBC White House correspondent John Cochran is at his post tonight with the latest. John?
Tom, White House spokesman Marlin Fitzwater inadvertently set off alarms today when he refused to rule out a third country haven for Noriega. Fitzwater said, "We want Noriega brought back to the United States, but we refuse to rule out every other alternative." To some, that seemed a switch from President Bush's flat statement last Saturday that Noriega no longer has the third country option because U.S. blood has now been spilled.
The death of one Marine, the brutalization of a wife of a lieutenant, the death of a lot of our kids, that's what's changed. And that's why I feel very strongly that we're not back to square one.
But today, Fitzwater said, "We never said no third country." Bush does not want to fight with the Vatican, so if the Vatican prefers to send Noriega from its embassy to another country, Bush will not complain if the U.S. has a good chance of extraditing Noriega for prosecution in Florida. The White House was already declaring victory today in Panama, saying Bush has restored democracy. His critics say Bush overreacted.
So the human, moral, and geopolitical costs have been much too great for the results.
There's clearly no right in the world for one country to decide that another country ought to have democracy and to send in the troops to impose it.
But most of Bush's usual critics in Congress have been reluctant to attack him for an invasion that the public seems to like.
I think Congress is probably going to be reluctant to accuse Bush of being too much of a wimp anymore, but I think it's probably given Bush a political benefit that'll carry him for a while.
The president's men think that after Panama, Bush now really looks like a commander-in-chief, that the Democrats will probably give him a free ride on foreign policy and will instead attack him where they think he is vulnerable, on domestic policy, issues like drugs and education. Tom?
Thank you, John. The United States didn't get everyone it wanted in Panama. This is Mike Harari, a former high-ranking Israeli intelligence official who became Noriega's trusted advisor on security and money. Harari apparently escaped Panama after the invasion, and American authorities say he is now back in Israel. In nearby Nicaragua, many accusations but no hard conclusions tonight on who shot and killed two nuns, one of them an American. The shooting occurred 2 days ago, and the Nicaraguan government has accused the Contras, that rebel force backed by the United States. NBC's Maureen Meehan reports this tragically familiar dispute.
Sister Maureen Courtney was mourned by her friends. Some grieved openly, others prayed for the end of the war. But as the war entered its second decade, instead of winding down, it seems to be stepping up, or at least going back to its old ways. Monday's ambush that took the lives of Sister Maureen and a Nicaraguan nun occurred in a remote area of Nicaragua where the Contras have been active over the years, one of the few areas in which the Contras moved about at will. This time, however, the Contras claimed they were not responsible for the ambush.
The possibilities that this act was made by our forces is not possible.
In Washington, the State Department condemned the attack, but there is no information on who was responsible. One of those wounded, like Bishop Paul Schmitz of Wisconsin, said there was an explosion, shooting, and he never saw the attackers. But Nicaraguan government official Alejandro Bendaña said the attack was clearly carried out by the Contras.
We've also pinpointed as the specific Contra military units that were responsible for the attack, and they're being pursued actively at this point.
Sister Paquita, a nun who lives in the area, says this is Contra territory, has been for years, and that the surprise ambush bears all the markings of a Contra attack. Maureen Meehan for NBC News, Managua.
And there is trouble in the Soviet Union tonight. Mikhail Gorbachev has put off until next week a trip to the Republic of Lithuania, where the local Communist Party has broken away from Moscow. The reason for the delay may be new trouble in another republic, Azerbaijan. The government today sent more troops to Azerbaijan, a mainly Muslim republic, where thousands of people are demanding unification with Iran, and they have destroyed border guard towers and frontier markers. Widespread disturbances are being reported all along the border, in fact. And Romania's new government today lifted restrictions on travel. It said all Romanians will be able to go freely to the West with passports available within just 1 day. And officials in Czechoslovakia said today that 2/3 of the country's prisoners, 23,000 altogether, will be released in the next 3 weeks under an amnesty program announced by the new president, Václav Havel. Also coming up here tonight on NBC Nightly News, the latest on Barbara Bush's eye treatment. And Stephen Frazier on a Florida courtroom experiment. Kids sitting in judgment of other kids. Guess what? They hand out tougher sentences than do adults. Barbara Bush underwent radiation treatment today for that thyroid disorder that is causing her double vision. It was the start of 10 days of treatment that she will receive at the Walter Reed Army Medical Center. The radiation is to reduce swelling behind her eyes. Her doctors say that if that doesn't work, they may try surgery next. The drug treatment known as chemotherapy has proven effective against several forms of cancer, and it has helped prolong lives. But it also has its risks, and new research released today indicates that chemotherapy can increase the risk of another deadly form of cancer. NBC Science correspondent Robert Bazell.
Your liver, your lungs, the abdomen, everything is clean. Okay.
Bindi Owen has been getting treatments for ovarian cancer for 7 years. First surgery, then chemotherapy. She is doing fine, but this latest research indicates that she and others who get chemotherapy face a new threat, a greatly increased risk of leukemia. In this week's issue of the New England Journal of Medicine, 2 articles detail the increased risk for patients treated for ovarian cancer and for patients getting chemotherapy for Hodgkin's disease, another type of cancer. The authors of the studies conclude that for patients with Hodgkin's disease, like this woman, the benefits of the chemotherapy far outweigh the risk of getting leukemia. But that is not always the case for ovarian cancer. Chemotherapy drugs are often strong poisons. Doctors say it is likely that chemotherapy treatments for most types of cancer increase the risk of leukemia. But doctors say that should not worry most cancer patients.
As long as the chance of surviving free of disease is well in excess of the risk of leukemia, that shouldn't deter them from being exposed to the treatment.
The studies published today indicate that certain chemotherapy drugs are more likely to cause leukemia, but the experts say it is not so easy to stop using those drugs.
They also happen to be the best drugs. So if you take the best drug out and you drop the cure rate by 50% and you increase the leukemia risk, or you decrease the risk of leukemia a little bit, you're not doing a favor for the patient.
Cancer researchers are looking for ways to lessen the risk of leukemia, but they say for now it is an unavoidable aspect of chemotherapy. Robert Bazell, NBC News, New York.
And there are new concerns tonight about contamination of the groundwater near that uranium processing plant in Fernald, Ohio. Wells drilled there found water containing up to 800 parts of uranium per billion. That's way above the EPA's proposed uranium standard for drinking water, which is only 30 parts per billion. Last year, the battleship, the USS Iowa, made news when one of its gun turrets blew up, killing 47 sailors. Well, today, defense officials revealed budget proposals to mothball the Iowa, along with the USS New Jersey. During the Reagan administration, those and 2 other battleships were taken out of mothballs at a cost of almost $2 billion. Sometimes they're called drug supermarkets. They're street corners, really, alleys, places where illegal drugs are sold openly in this country. You can find them in almost any inner city in America, but they're not just an inner city problem. As NBC's Bob Jameson reports tonight, more and more of the customers are now coming from the suburbs.
When the crack and cocaine dealers open for business in Harlem, the line forms fast. The anxious assemble quickly with money in hand. And just as quickly, the money passes through a hole in a boarded-up building in exchange for the drugs. But increasingly, it is not this business on which the dealers are thriving. It is money from buyers like this man, commuters from the suburbs to Harlem, where the drugs are plentiful, cheap, and available in the open. Commuter links like the George Washington Bridge, which carries residents of the New Jersey suburbs to New York, are being turned into drug connections. The continuing problem of commuters buying drugs is hampering law enforcement efforts to gain control of the rampant narcotics trade in the nation's inner cities. 60 to 90% of the arrests in recent police sting operations in poor black neighborhoods here and elsewhere were white residents of suburban communities.
No.
Special Agent Robert Stutman of the Drug Enforcement Administration.
That the majority of money that goes to the cartels comes not from the crack addict, but from the cocaine user. And a significant percentage of those users are in the suburbs, not necessarily in the inner city or poor.
Stutman says that suburbanites are too often blind to the danger associated with buying drugs in a place like Harlem. That became a tragic reality recently in this New Jersey cemetery for the bewildered husband, relatives, and friends of 33-year-old Janet Piero. She was shot to death in a rented car on a Harlem street at 5 o'clock on a Sunday morning as her 4-year-old son sat in the back seat. Authorities say the only explanation is that she was there to buy drugs. At treatment centers like Fair Oaks Hospital in New Jersey, doctors are noticing a disturbing trend of suburban housewives commuting in increasing numbers to the inner city to buy drugs. 30-year-old Sarah often took along her small son.
When you go and knock on the door and the person who opens the door has an Uzi or a gun in their hand, trying to make sure that they do know you and you're not coming there to rob them or try to get them.
But you're a suburban housewife. What are you doing there?
Getting my drugs.
You would go into one of these neighborhoods with your child and leave him locked in the car while you bought cocaine?
Yes, I would.
Were the drugs more important than your child?
Yes, the drugs were more important. That's the insanity of the disease.
Check it out and just tell me if you like it. Do you like it or? Please! Don't move!
To combat the problem, cities like New Haven, Philadelphia, and Miami are mounting frequent sting operations. Police officers pose as drug dealers. Others wait nearby to make the arrest. And the suburban buyer's car is confiscated. While big city police have made thousands of arrests, they wonder what the threat of jail will mean to a commuter whose desire for cocaine obscures the threat of death. Bob Jamison, NBC News, New York.
Rescuers searched the Gulf of California today for 11 American divers and 3 Mexican crewmen from the yacht Santa Barbara. They've been missing since the boat sank early Monday morning. 2 survivors, 1 American and 1 Mexican, were pulled from the water. They say the boat was capsized by a large wave. That huge oil spill off the coast of Morocco moved dangerously close to shore today. Winds gusting up to 40 miles an hour pushed the oil to within 12 miles of the coast. 19 million gallons leaked out of an Iranian supertanker after an explosion 2 weeks ago. Efforts to break up the oil continue. Oil, of course, is a major cause of pollution in the air, much of it from gasoline burned in cars. So today, General Motors came out with an alternative, a car powered by electricity. Here's NBC's chief economics correspondent, Irving R. Levine.
GM's electric car, which gets 120 miles on a single battery charge and can go 60 miles an hour, was driven to the unveiling by GM chairman Roger Smith. Although it can go further and faster than earlier electric cars, the GM Impact, as it's called, won't have an impact on transportation for years, if ever. It's too inconvenient.
If you want to fill up your car today, you pull into a gas station, you can fill it up in 5 minutes. If you want to recharge your electric vehicle, you're going to have to do it overnight, and it'll be like recharging your razor.
Nevertheless, GM had a reason for demonstrating its electric car at this time. The auto industry is under heavy pressure, not only from environmentalists to reduce pollution, but also from the president, who only yesterday stressed that passage of his Clean Air Act is a top priority. Earlier, to demonstrate his environmental concerns, the president drove a car that runs on ethanol, a fuel made from corn and other grain. Early in the century, electric cars far outnumbered gasoline-powered cars, and today, Southern California Edison is experimenting with GM electric vans. But experts say that wide use of electric cars is not the answer to pollution.
I think it would create more problems than it would solve, and that's because we have to generate the electricity somewhere. It would be generated at power plants, and that would create a great deal more pollution.
Well into the next century, pollution cleanup is expected to focus not on electric cars, but on cleaner gasoline and better emission controls. The first will drive up the price of gasoline, the second, the price of cars. Irving R. Levine, NBC News, Washington.
More economic news, sort of. When a small company in Georgia came out with a line of business cards, it decided to call them Trump cards. Well, billionaire developer Donald Trump sued, claiming unauthorized use of his name. Now comes word of a settlement. Trump agreed to endorse the cards in return for a monthly royalty. A new decade, a small deal. One of the most vexing problems in this country is juvenile crime. It's a problem on the streets, where it's often violent, and in the courtroom, where there's a world of difference between the adult officials and the juvenile defendants. Tonight, NBC's Stephen Frazier has the story of a Florida experiment designed to attack both problems.
I want to talk to you just about a few important things, most importantly, the concept of reasonable doubt.
If sitting in judgment made them uncomfortable, these teenagers gave no sign. All 6 wore poker faces as they listened to final arguments. The defendant, a 16-year-old runaway accused of stealing her mother's jewelry. She knew the jurors. About halfway through the trial, she started wishing she didn't.
Some of them don't like me, and they take it out personally.
But the judge didn't see any evidence of that in this case. He agreed with the jury's verdict, as he has every time but one.
The insight they give is to the thinking of the defendants, of the youngsters who come before me, I think is valuable.
There are other programs where teenagers sit on juries, but in none of those do they have so much power. Here, teenage juries can sentence defendants to time in an institution. They say they are quicker to convict than adults, and that defendants know this.
Once the juveniles come into a juvenile court, then they see us and they realize that they're getting tried by their peers, and we're going to be tougher on them than probably any adult jury would be.
Some defendants plead guilty right away, so the judge will decide their sentence instead of the teens.
And I want to make sure you understand it's your last shot. One more slip, one more fall, and you're going away. You're going to be committed. You understand what I'm saying to you, son?
What about the dispositions the judge handed out yesterday?
Jury duty was designed as a civics lesson by Judge Swanson and high school teacher Cynthia Brendel.
In America, we have citizens that they don't want to participate in any civil processes, and I'm hoping that we have some citizens that want to participate as adults in the criminal justice system.
It's a system under strain as this agricultural and retirement area becomes suburban. More crimes, more violence in the crimes. Detention centers are so crowded, some juvenile offenders must sleep in the hallways. Judge Swanson says the law no longer deters many young people intent on crime. Time to introduce some real authority, peer pressure. Stephen Frazier, NBC News, Dade City, Florida.
That's nightly news for this Wednesday night. I'm Tom Brokaw. I'll see you tomorrow night.